Welcome to the Talking Transformation podcast. I'm your podcast host, Peter Ahmad, recording from Cape Town, South Africa, since June 2019. The Talking Transformation podcast provides an open and accessible platform for built environment professionals and interest groups to share their reflections and aspirations relating to the transformation of places and spaces in South Africa. It's intended to be a celebration of the individuals and community groups who are supporting formal and informal processes that are addressing the challenges of South Africa's history and shaping the future of our neighbourhoods and cities. Joining me on this Talking Transformation podcast bulletin is Dr. Mark Napier today, currently Principal Researcher with the CSIR. Mark was the Programme Director of the Urban Land Markets Programme in Southern Africa between 2006 and 2013. That was an initiative that really did generate some foundational research and publications in South Africa. And today we're talking to him about the Urban Knowledge Exchange Southern Africa, or UKESA, platform that he developed as an online knowledge sharing platform. Importantly, UKESA has been supporting the Talking Transformation podcast in establishing a stable web-based platform and archive of material that you can search by key topics, guest names, etc. In this bulletin, we talk about the platform, how it came about, and what you can find on there in terms of research material, but also starting to understand that archive of Talking Transformation material and how we see the collaboration continue between the podcast and the UKESA platform. So it's just gone 4:30 on Monday, April the 5th, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome to the Talking Transformation podcast Dr. Mark Napier up in Gauteng. Mark, how are you keeping? How do we find you today, and what have you been up to?
Good, thanks, Pete. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been a listener for a few years now, so to be in the room with you is quite a privilege. Yep, Gauteng is still here, going over to winter, or at least autumn, but yeah, having a good day, thanks.
It's really great to have you on here, Mark. You and I have talked about having a conversation for a good couple of months now, and there's a few things we wanted to talk about, specifically some of the work that you have been doing in relation to UKESA. We're going to describe what that is and the platform and what's available to all the listeners beyond the Talking Transformation podcast and more broadly the academic and practitioner space. I just thought it would be fun before we kick off into that. You spent some time in the northeast of England, some of your studies back in the 90s in Newcastle, the northeast of England, very close to my old hometown of Sunderland. Just wanted to check, sort of get a sense from you, some of your memories of the northeast of England.
That was early 1990s, just before democracy at South Africa, and it was a master's. It was a scholarship, so it took me there with my spouse for a year of masters. So it was a centre at the University of Newcastle upon Tyne that's now called GURU, Global Urban Research Unit. And then I stayed on for another year. And we lived in student accommodation right outside St. James Park, and heard the matches on, at least from a distance, on a Saturday afternoon. But yeah, amazingly beautiful town, city. Newcastle, Gateshead across the river, beautiful area along the Tyne. And it was a very good time, very happy memories.
Yeah, one of the great cities of the north there, Newcastle, a great favourite and a very special place in terms of my growing up. And thanks for sharing that. And certainly those Newcastle supporters, they make a lot of noise, even though they don't necessarily have too much to shout about. But thanks for taking us down a trip down memory lane there, Mark. And also let's talk a bit about your work in the sort of mid 2000s through to I think 2013-14, working with the Urban Landmark team. You were absolutely pivotal in that, and really I think made a huge mark in the research and sort of evidence base for South African planning and the built environment during that period. Perhaps there's some thoughts around the highlights, around the research and outputs from that period where you were working with some of the very best minds in the country.
Yeah. That was part of the journey. So it started off in architecture. The Newcastle stint was when I started to specialize in housing and research. And then that led to the PhD as well. And then in 2006 or so, it was a DFID or UK aid program. And they had a stable of these making markets work for the poor or with the poor, from financial markets, commodity markets, trade markets, and then land markets was the one that I ended up setting up, and we ran it for 7 years. And fascinating. It was a great time then to look at how land underlies everything we do in cities. So the housing aspect I'd had before, but to understand rights to land and how land markets work. And I think we made a contribution. As you mentioned, we had really brilliant team of people looking at the market aspects, the rights aspects, the physical design, and even the educational sort of transferring knowledge about things. But yeah, we had so many opportunities. So it was a Southern Africa initiative working in various countries. But yeah, it was a good learning period, and I think we made an impact. I think we built an evidence base. We built new knowledge about how people access land in informal settlements, inner cities, on the edges of cities, what transactions they made, what they paid, how they built up trust. And that across 5 countries became a real evidence base. I'm not going to mention all the names. There were so many that contributed to these methods and this evidence. But it became really valuable, and then that allowed us a platform for advocacy to bring to people's attention the importance of markets and the difference between not markets as a private sector set of actors making profit, but markets as a lens to apply to how cities work, how people make transactions, how they end up living in a place and then leaving a place and going somewhere else. And those transactions, just fascinating. And we ended up, I think, having an impact on UN Habitat, on some of the World Bank Land and Poverty conferences, which happen every year. We did, I think, have an impact, even if it was humble, but it was a really good learning experience.
Very much so, and I think one of the strengths was the way that you involved the practitioners. I seem to remember a very diverse agenda in the CBD of Johannesburg. I think we had Subs Munsami up from eThekwini, had myself talking early, sort of some of the thinking around the new, or rather Diepsloot at the time, and so really mixing it up in terms of the academic and the practitioners. I think that was really one of the big strengths, and one of the great sadnesses was when obviously I think the funding ran out and the program came to an end. But as part of the sort of legacy of that, we still have this Urban Knowledge Exchange South Africa, also known as UKESA, and that's really the purpose of our discussion today. Over and above reflecting a bit on the history of urban landmark. And perhaps let's just get into the genesis of UKESA, what it's about, what will people find there, Mark? Who should be accessing it? And once they've accessed it, what are the material and archive of information they'll find there?
Yeah, some of this came out of the time with the Urban Landmarks program, Urban Landmark, where we put a lot of emphasis in making the new research and our positions available on a website. And I could see the following growing of people using that information. So even at that time, we were batting around this idea of an online library, because a lot of things get done, a lot of research gets produced, guidelines get produced, case studies, best practices, and they can be in the office of an NGO in the middle of the country, and you go and visit the NGO and they have all this brilliant information, and it's not always online. You sometimes ask a government department, what about your policy that you had a few years ago? It used to be on our website, but it's not current, but it's on somebody's computer. And so we started to have this idea of how do we have an online repository that allows people to share their information, keep it available, classify it well so that you can find it, and just try to keep it available for as long as possible. Now, we were having this discussion sort of 2008, 2009 in smoky bars, It was actually it was a smoky tea room at the World Bank. But this discussion of how do we not lose and keep available so much good information that needs to apply to practice, and that takes a lot of effort to find it. And in the transition of the world from document hard copy based to electronic, that was a whole transition. When we were first talking about it, we didn't have Google Docs and all sorts of other platforms. We didn't have as much online collaboration as we have now. So now it's a whole huge ecosystem. And with COVID, the dependence on this engagement online is so much more important. But it all adds impetus to this need to try to capture stuff and keep it available, and then make it easily accessible. So that's what we're trying to do with Urban Knowledge Exchange. We went with this idea. So then I moved back to CSR in 2013. And about 2015, I took this idea to the Department of Science and Innovation, our national innovation department. And CSIR as a science council is one of the daughter departments to Department of Science and Innovation. So we posited this, or we tabled this idea with DSI. They liked it, and so they gave us the seed funding to do the development. So 2015, 2016, sort of conceptualizing, doing a lot of the research for what works, what doesn't, what other people were doing around the world, and then into software development, and then into population of the whole platform with articles and information about people and organizations. So that was kind of how it came about. Again, with lots of collaborators, people on our steering committee that gave lots of advice, and our we're still a humble operation, but we try to fill this gap between people producing new knowledge and evidence, whether it's old or new, and then making it available, amplifying people and their messages to an audience which is quite specialized, which is very similar to your podcast audience. It's people looking for information in this sphere. And our emphasis is Southern Africa. We need to broaden ourselves into the region more than we are at the moment.
I think you've touched on something important there, Mark, is that synergy between the platform and the work the podcast has tried to do, which is build that conversation, build that archive of material and conversations with people who've been at the forefront or working very much within the communities across the country around transformative practices. And I think that's what this has really been about, is to, on the one hand, reflect that you've been kind enough to give the Talking Transformation podcast a space. And any of the listeners can go to UKESA and find the entire backlog of the Talking Transformation, what I call now Series 1, which was all the episodes that we did from June, July 2019 through to August, September last year. And then really using the platform for Series 2 as almost the main website for the podcast going forward. It's something that we haven't had. It's not something that we're going to spend a lot of time on from a website development point of view. That's not where the interest is at this stage. So UKESA providing us that platform and having given us that platform, but really amplifying it through Series 2 is a huge opportunity. And again, from my side, really want to thank you, Mark, for allowing us to have that presence there. If there are people listening to this, and I'm thinking again, there have been a number of conversations we're having with other organizations who are trying to develop the conversation and the archive material and thinking, how can people get hold of you to potentially become partners within the UKESA and make sure that their publications, their material, whether it's audio or literature, gets onto that website and is there available as that ongoing resource?
Yeah. No, firstly, it's really brilliant to have you using the platform to, as you say, amplify some of the messaging. It's a really good use case. I think they call it a use case in the software developments, where someone doesn't necessarily want to have a full-on website themselves. And then this Urban Knowledge Exchange allows you to sign up as an individual with a login, and then sign up your organization. And and it's really nice to have your information on our site. So it also means that you can upload stuff very quickly. So even some large organizations use us because they can get online quicker than they can through their own webmasters and things. But also the smaller operations don't then necessarily have to start their own, or they can amplify their own websites and other platforms that they use. So so your organization is called the Talking Transformation Podcast. If people go to UKESA.info, then you can go to the top menu, which you will see has got partners, and the partners are the organization. So Talking Transformation is a partner, and you can search that partner area. And then you, as Pete Ahmed, who is the person, you are called a contributor because you're contributing knowledge. So whoever signs up, that's your login, and you can come in, and we then just approve the content. There's an editorial policy, privacy policy, security policy, all of those nice things. And then that's kind of how it works. And the other thing is that it's a bit like the film site IMDb, because there's three things happening. There's the films, which in our case is the documents, the content, the podcasts, the products, the knowledge products. Then you as the author, you're like the actor. So you as the author have written stuff. So when you go to your profile, you see everything that you've authored. And then the third area is the organization. Maybe it's like the film company, but you have this three-way relationship of being able to look up a person, an organization, and their content. And every page leads you to the other page. So if you've got an academic who's written a lot, you can go to that academics page and you can see everything that they've got on our site. And then you can go to their organization, in that case, a university, and see all the people in that university who are signed up as well. So it goes from product to person to organization. So that's the kind of how the database works, kind of relational database.
And I must say that is hugely effective, Mark. I needed to dip into one of the previous Urban Landmark documents, specifically on the title deeds. I think it was published in 2011. So we're talking about a document that's 11 years old. And within a few keystrokes, I'd found the document in PDF, high res, available, and that in itself is gold. And I have no doubt that all of those Urban Landmark publications are there, and all of the other contributors. So a very, very powerful platform, and I would really encourage people to get in contact with you. How can they get in? You've mentioned the UKESA.info as the actual website URL, but if people want to get hold of you directly, Mark, is there an email address, a Twitter handle, or some such people can get hold of you on?
Yeah, there's a few ways. I do have my profile on UKESA, my own, so you look me up. And then there's a little button that says Ask Advice just below my photograph. You click on that, it sends me an email. And that's an option that people have if they want people to be able to approach them. But we do moderate that as well. And then you can write to UKESA@csir.co.za. That's our official mailing list. And yeah, we're on all we're on the three platforms of social media: Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. So you'll see we post at least once or twice a week about new content, and there's a newsletter that goes out. So every time you upload a new podcast that's come out last week, a little heading will go out along with the other new content for the week to the alert mailbox of people that have signed up for email alerts. So that email alerts is really a nice function, because it just tells you what did we put on the site this week, and you see a title that you think is interesting, your latest Talking Transformation podcast. One click and you're onto the page, and another click and you're onto the podcast. So that's all of these things work nicely together.
Certainly does. And again, thank you to the team, yourself, personally, Mark, for making that available. It really is a fantastic resource. I do hope we'll see not just the podcast grow, but more, the UKESA platform really grow in strength and a number of people who use it. So all the very best with that. Before I let you go, Mark, the work you're doing with the CSIR, the research that you might be involved with at the minute, anything you'd like to particularly showcase?
Yeah, I mean, this work on knowledge dissemination, knowledge sharing is taking quite a lot of the time at the moment, and we're quite well funded at the moment. So we're always looking for further funding and, into the longer term, and partners who will work with us. So we're trying to push the envelope a little bit. We're trying to get more capacity to moderate and upload content. We're trying to improve how we communicate, both visually, but certainly information-wise. So that is taking a lot of time. Other things, we're building some databases of alternative technologies. We do all sorts of things, actually. So, it's never a dull moment. But, and obviously the land work I've kept in touch with. We work quite a lot with groups like Land Portal in the Netherlands. And they also have a similar knowledge hub to us, which is focused on land issues. So we keep in touch with them both to share learning, but also to work on the land issues themselves. So, lots going on.
Sounds to me like we'll be having a conversation in the coming months about a deeper dive into some of those very interesting topics, Mark. And for the moment, really want to thank you for your time and for the opportunity you've afforded Talking Transformation podcast. To you and the UKESA team and the CSIR, all the very, very best. Keep safe and speak to you soon.
Thanks, Pete.
We hope you enjoyed this content of the Talking Transformation podcast. Please feel free to give us feedback via our Twitter platform. That's @TalkingTransfo and the number 1, or alternatively via our email address talkingtransformation101@gmail.com. Thanks and recognition also to Tribal Need for allowing us to use their track Flags as our introductory and closeout music on this podcast.